Max Minutes are designed to have insights from experts for the workforce development community on trends, opportunities, and topics that are timely for us as a community. And we're delighted to carry one of those to you today. So this morning, we are going to thank all of our sponsors who make this possible, the anchors investors in the Metro Atlanta Exchange for Workforce Solution. They're here, the WorkSource Georgia for the whole state, WorkSource Metro Atlanta of the 5 Metro boards, Department of Human Services, Atlanta Career Rise, Goodwill of North Georgia, Metro Atlanta Change of Bobby Dodd, and First Step Staffing. They make this possible, and the work of Max, along with all of our new members. We're so delighted with the response to the membership drive and welcome all of you as new members or guests, and we hope that you will become a member. So I am Jenny Taylor. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I welcome you to this event, and I'm going to turn it over to Daniela Perry, who's also a board member, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Jenny. We're really excited to have Dr. Pruitt with us from the Southern Regional Education Board. They've done some really interesting research about automation, how it's being accelerated kind of by the impacts of COVID-19, and really what this means for our workforce as a whole. So we're grateful for Dr. Pruitt's time to share what they've learned and answer some of our questions. So Dr. Pruitt, we'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, and it is so great to be with everybody this morning. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint here, but it's wonderful to be with everybody. Thank you so much for joining and for giving me a chance to be here to talk to you a little bit. As Daniela said, my name is Stephen Pruitt. I'm president of the Southern Regional Education Board. I've been with the board now for 2.5 years, a little more than that. And I'm going to just very quickly start by just telling you just a very quick overview of who we are and why we do this type of work. We are an interstate compact. So we're not a think tank. We're not a membership organization. We actually are very similar to what happens when 2 states build a bridge over a body of water. They enter an interstate compact. We're both assured that they are going to maintain the bridge and give access to its citizens. So back in 1948, there was a commission that deemed the South to be the biggest economic liability in the country. And in doing so, the governors and the legislatures at that time said, we need to work on this together. As such, they created the Southern Regional Education Board. So our board is made up of our 16 governors and 4 appointees by those governors. Yeah, it's a massive board. We've got 80 members on our board, but what it does is it allows us to have both engagement and interaction with some of the highest levels of our state government. Here, of course, we are located here in Atlanta. We are here in Georgia. We get to interact with Governor Kemp's office and the legislature here quite often, as well as the state superintendent and the higher ed chancellor. So what SREB is really good at are really 3 things, and they are all cyclical. We analyze and publish information such as the stuff that I'm about to share with you today. We convene people around that information and engage people from decision makers to practitioners. And then we support the states as they take action. Every state's a little different. We stretch from Delaware. Yes, we consider Delaware Southern. From Delaware down to Florida, over to Texas and back up through Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Kentucky. And so obviously what's going to work in Georgia is going to be very different than what works in Delaware. So our focus is supporting our states specifically. Now what I've been asked to share with you today is some really good work that our staff has put together around the workforce. So you may go, well, if you're education, why are you dealing with the workforce? Well, remember what I said. We were created because the South was an economic liability. So our focus is to increase the economic viability of the South through education. But you can't do that if you don't really understand what the workforce is and what it will be. Education, as many of you know, probably all of you know, it's not an easy thing to change. And so it takes time. So we have to have our eye on the ball for what's current, but also what's coming down the pipe. So what I'd like to do is give you a little Georgia context first, just so you can kind of see what's coming. You know, we could have some things to brag about. You know, in 2021, Georgia was ranked as the best state in the nation for business for the 8th consecutive year by Site Selection magazine. The Quick Start program at TCSG, the Technical College System of Georgia, was rated the #1 workforce training program in the U.S. By several leading business publications. Obviously, we became sort of Hollywood East. We've had a lot of things. In fact, it's been rather nice that we have not seen quite the impact of COVID-19 in Georgia that we've seen in some of our other states. Now, don't get me wrong, we've been hit hard, but not quite as bad from the revenue projections as what we see in some of the other states. Now, we still have a lot of challenge. We have a lot in poverty. We rank 37th in the US on our overall poverty rate at 13.3%. And as we continue to deal with this, the fallout from COVID is the issues that we had coming into COVID are now going to be exacerbated by COVID-19. 45% of our state's workforce are at risk for unemployment, reduced work hours, or exiting the labor force in general. 63% of Georgia workers only have a high school diploma or less, and you're going to see in a moment why that's such a big deal. Now, first of all, I want to put this on the table because I think this is important for us all to recognize. By 2030, for every 52 dependent people in Georgia, that's people under 25 and over 65, there are only going to be 48 working age adults to provide for them. So for the first time in our state or nation's history, we're going to have more people dependent. Now, this is age dependent. This does not count disabilities. It does not count any other type of issue. This is purely age dependent. So these are individuals that rely on people in the workforce to supply Social Security, to supply really so much of what we do around our tax system. But for the first time, we're going to have more of those people dependent than those who are actually putting into the system as working age adults. That is going to be a significant issue, as you will see in just a moment. In our workforce, 5% of our jobs are completely automatable at current, but 44% of all the work activities have automation potential. And the thing is, in Georgia, the top 5 industries, the potential tends to be greater. Food and preparation services, sales, office administration, production, transportation. We see where there is a great possibility that automation is going to begin to have a much greater hold on how we handle our workforce. Now, unlike what people have said forever, I guess going back to the Jetsons, you know, we're not going to have robots that are going to simply just take over the world. And as all of you in the industry know, you actually do have a decrease in the workforce in terms of the more mundane type of tasks or skills. But we also see where there's a greater potential for more jobs, but they are all going to be at a higher level and require a higher level of thinking and problem solving. SREB published a couple of reports. First of all, there was Unprepared and Unaware. That came out in 2018, and about a year later, we came out with the SREB's Regional Economic Outlook. Both of these can be seen on our website. Now, I'm going to tell you that what we did in these two publications, it does go to some of the worst case scenario of what could happen based on the impact of automation and artificial intelligence. We actually see where we have the potential, not just for unemployed individuals, but unemployable individuals. And the ones that are going to be most impacted are those with the lowest skill set and the lowest levels of education. So what's our automation? Well, across the Southern Regional Education Board, right now, at least 30% of work activities and 60% of jobs are automatable. 5% of those jobs are completely automatable, and between 23 and 44% of the work activities may be automatable by 2030. Now, the reality is what COVID has done has thrown that last statistic off a bit. And I'll share a little bit more about that in just a moment, but we have seen that become accelerated. If you look at our unprepared and unaware report, these are the numbers that you would see, but as I'll show you momentarily, actually COVID has actually accelerated that to a rather unnerving degree. Now, when we had the Great Recession through 2010, here's what happened. You can take a look at this and see that those who had bachelor's degrees or higher, by the end of the recovery period in 2016, had actually added 4 million jobs. Those who had an associate's degree or some college, we lost about 300,000 jobs, but they had added 1.2 million back. But those who had high school diplomas or less during the recession lost 7.3 million jobs. Since the recovery through 2016, they added 8 million jobs back. So as you can see, they barely got back to a net of 0. This is the more sobering part to me. So during this time, and these are actually individuals. Again, we see people who had bachelor's degree or higher gain jobs. We had about 8.4 million people gain jobs by the end of recovery. 3.1 million people gain jobs for those who had some associate's degree or college. But notice that the 5.6 million people who lost their jobs during the recession, only 80,000 of those people got those jobs back. Well, we could ask the question, well, why is that? Why did that happen the way it did? Well, in industry, we know that what we've got to do is we've got to generate our product. We've got to continue our industry moving forward. So industry had to find better ways to get the work done without sacrificing quality or production. So in that time, there became a greater reliance on automation and artificial intelligence. So what that means is that we saw a net gain of 8.6 million jobs if you had a bachelor's, or 1.2 million gain if you had an associate's or some college, but overall a 4.8 million net loss if you had a high school diploma or less. So where we sit, and we have been working and talking with our state and industry leaders now for about a year and a half. And of course, once COVID hit, it put us into a whole other level. But the reality is if we don't start making some real systemic focused change now, we are going to see a lot more underemployment or actual unemployability. A person who graduates high school only is not going to have the skill level necessary to be in a job. So when I say they're unemployable, it's not that they don't want to be, it's that they simply don't have the skills to be able to step into the job that they want to step into. Earning incomes are going to be below the poverty level. There will be greater dependence on the social welfare services. Those two issues, remember how I said that there are 52 dependents for every 48? Think about this. If we see the maximum number of individuals who reach unemployability, there's not going to be as much money coming into the system to help with any type of social services, even though there will be more that will be putting a demand on. Of course, the scariest part of this is they are unable to launch the next generation. See, here's the thing, folks. I'm going to show you a slide that's going to tell you what a possible prediction of unemployability is in the South and in Georgia. And that's going to be the people who are currently in the workforce. But see, what we found was their children are 10 times more likely to go into the same line of work and have the same degree level as their parents, which means we could see a complete multi-generational crisis. So we would be unable to launch that next generation of workforce that's needed. This is a scary one, and we put it in red for a reason. But in the Southern Regional Education Board region, most of our 50 million workers will be affected by automation in some way. But if we don't act, we will see 18 million unemployable adults by what we originally thought would be 2030. We actually see where there is an impending crisis here, where these folks won't just be unemployed, they simply will not have the skills necessary to jump into the workforce and retain those jobs. Daniela, I see you turned your camera back on. Are you doing that because you have a question you want me to answer?
I do. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Pruitt. I just wanted to kind of emphasize, if you could just kind of talk a little bit more about that future generation piece. I know that's something that we're all eager to catch kids while they're still in high school, get them into a technical college certificate, really make sure they continue with good momentum. And I know university system too has had their momentum year to keep people on a really great path. What does this really practically look like if we do, have adults that aren't able to continue working, maybe kids, have to stay home and really, just provide income for their families. I know we've seen a lot of that with COVID. The high schoolers have kept their jobs and maybe they decided not to go to college this year because they need to help provide for their family. I was wondering if you could just kind of talk a little bit more about that and maybe how we as workforce developers can intervene. We've done a lot of work with our Smart Decisions Coalition, which I know you've spoken to before too, about how we can reduce some of these barriers to help get kids back in. But if you could kind of just share a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, one of the things that is going to be really important here is that we approach this from a systemic standpoint. I actually did a survey at our annual meeting a couple of years ago. And I asked the question, if we want to have a successful workforce by 2030, what age group should we focus on? And I gave them, the usual of, 6 to 18, 19 to 25, 25. And we have an 88% of the people in the room believe that it's about a K-12 issue. The reality is that it's a much more systemic problem. So I'm the former state superintendent of Kentucky, and we saw multi-generational unemployment there. And what happens is as students are coming through the system, if they are seeing or perceiving that their parents are getting by as being unemployed, then they are less motivated to actually go that next extra step as well. So what we've got to do is actually approach this from a systemic standpoint. We have to think about how can we offer upskilling to the adults that are currently in the workforce, which means we've got to do some investing, both in terms of finances, but also in terms of how we're approaching jobs in terms of flexibility. One of the biggest barriers to people is when they're working 40, 50-hour work weeks, is when are they going to have time to get that additional upskilling? So finding ways that we can support them through potential childcare after work, leveraging time on the job to allow them to experience things potentially in a virtual workspace, or to actually let them go get the training itself, are going to be pretty critical. In doing that, the students that are coming, their children who are coming behind them are seeing mom and dad making a real effort to better themselves for the workforce. At a K-12 level, one of the things that workforce developers could really help with is helping facilitate partnerships between the K-12 system and workforce. Now, this is hard. Work-based learning opportunities are, everybody believes that they're good, but they can also be very difficult. I know in Kentucky, one of the things that we did to try to lower one of those barriers was, especially in the areas of advanced manufacturing, where there's a legitimate concern about safety, because the industry, worry, and rightfully so, about potential safety issues and of course the impact on their insurance. So for instance, we did a statewide contract with ADECO, who is, I'm sure everybody knows, is an employment agency. And basically in doing so, ADECO would hire our students for work-based learning and then place them in those industries. And they would be covering the insurance, workman's comp type issues, and the industry was able to bring them in apprenticeship type modalities. So I think a big thing here is to think about how can we partner with K-12 to help them see the importance of that partnership. You speak different languages often between a high school and an industry. They need somebody to help translate sometimes. They need, unfortunately, a lot of times in our high schools, there's not the access or even the knowledge of what industry is out there, what's local that I could actually partner with. And so I think a big thing, if we really want to make a difference here with this, to help this multiple generational aspect, is to really focus on how do we find the partnerships, and then how do we create flexibilities within the workplace to allow more people to engage. I'm actually going to show you an example of that in just a moment as well. So here's the part I want you to see about Georgia. So I said 18 million possible unemployable adults. We may see as many as 1.5 million in Georgia alone. Georgia obviously is a larger state. We see that there is and as we said, we've already got a huge number of our workforce that have high school diplomas or less, and those are the most vulnerable. So we may see 1.5 million individuals who are unemployable. Now, again, these are people who are currently in the workforce, so that doesn't count their children. So we've got to continue to work on that. Now, pre-pandemic, the top 5 activities, we saw where roughly 69% of food and preparation services was already automatable. Sales, office, production, transportation, we see those things before the pandemic. But once the pandemic hit, and this is kind of the scary part, in the 8 weeks that we saw closed down due to COVID, we saw business become more dependent on automation by about 5 years. So think about it. In 8 weeks' time, industry accelerated their dependence on automation by 5 years. So remember when I said we were predicting this by 2030? We actually potentially are seeing this by 2025. We thought 2030 was the next horizon, but actually 2025 is the next exit. So there's a lot of work to do, and unfortunately not as much time to do it in. So that means that by 2025, the accelerated adoption due to the pandemic could eliminate full-time equivalents of 389,000 positions, and that's the most conservative estimate. A midpoint would be about 1.3 million. And if you really wanted to go to the scary side, you could see as many as 2.5 million positions based on the acceleration of automation dependence. In fact, if you look at those same 5 careers, food preparation and serving, you could see almost 100% of those jobs, those aspects of those jobs being automatable. I mean, already you walk into a McDonald's and you order using a giant iPad. Sales, office administrative is a little bit less, but 90% in production and 56% in transportation. I know before the pandemic hit, I was in Delaware visiting with their Secretary of Labor. He had taken his first driverless Uber in Pittsburgh. So this type of thing is coming. And we know that out west, there's a greater influence of focusing on driverless trucking, for instance. But here's the thing, Together, all these make up about 1/3 of the total workforce in Georgia. Now, what can we do? We need a unified vision of workforce. And friends, what I tell you is that industry has to be at the table on this and probably has to be the driver. You know, I mentioned that I was in Kentucky. I'm a Georgian by birth. I lived here my first 40 years and I'm thrilled to be back. But one of the things that I learned is that in Kentucky, when they had their biggest education reform, guess who it was driven by? Not education and not even legislative or gubernatorial. It was actually by industry, where industry said, we need a better workforce. We need a more educated workforce. And as such, Kentucky really went from one of the very worst performing states to about middle of the road. It took a couple of decades, but it got there, and that was driven so much by workforce. So this unified vision of workforce means that it's got to be something that we engage state leadership and partners. Partners are you. We've got to analyze data in rapid cycles. We still, in Georgia, we have a lot of different data systems, but they don't necessarily talk to one another. If you wanted to see one thing that could really make a significant difference, it could be a data system that has one hub that brings education, workforce, and post-secondary all to the same place. I had the opportunity to have that in Kentucky, and what it allowed me to do is we divided the state up into 8 regions of the state, into our different workforce innovation boards. And we could talk about the top 5 industries in each region, not worrying about the whole state, but in each region, what's the greatest need? And as a result, we could have better focused education programs in those regions than if we just said, oh, well, we need this as a blanket. And then we've got to prioritize and coordinate our actions. So that means that, you know, the Economic Development Cabinet, other bodies, state and regional workforce development boards, business leaders, industry sector partnerships, data experts, education and training leaders, and diverse community members all have to come together and do something that is not necessarily been done a whole lot, and that is to prioritize and coordinate. What are the industries that have been hardest hit by the pandemic? What are the jobs that are most needed to be filled right now? For critical jobs, what are the credentials that can be earned the fastest? People in communities that are most impacted. We need to inventory pre-COVID workforce initiatives to see if they're still what we need. And then we need to coordinate those actions. So when we talk about helping all these folks that need to be upskilled, this is what's got to happen. And it can't happen by industry. It's got to happen by individual industries, I should say. This is something that's got to happen as a collective. What we call find the North Star of what you want the workforce to be. Because you see, what you do here is you actually start thinking about things in balance of what you need today versus what is our long-term growth. So how do we work toward this unified vision? Well, we bring people together. There are different funding sources that are already available in K-12, post-secondary, and the workforce. The states are going to need to come together, or a state needs to come together with all of its stakeholders to think about how do we align our vision of our future workforce. Our K-12 need to establish good accountability and focus programs on what's going to be the best thing to educate and prepare students. One of the biggest challenges we have, folks, is there's still this mentality of the old VOTEC type workforce training. And we have entered the 4th industrial revolution because now computers and robots work with us. They don't work for us anymore, they work with us. That means that we've got to have students that are graduating high school. And you know, there's always the debate about not every kid needs to go to college. That's true. But what is also important is that the amount of problem solving and critical thinking that's necessary is equivalent for those that are going into industry as well as those going into college. It's how a person accelerates. I have a bachelor's degree and a PhD in chemistry. I'm clearly not doing those things. But one of the reasons I'm able to do what I do today is because I learned how to learn. We've got to have a greater focus on that in K-12. We've got to have a much better educated and prepared skilled workforce that can come from our post-secondary with our community technical colleges and our K-12. And folks, to be perfectly blunt, our four-year universities also have to realize that part of their job is to create future workers. And then we've got to figure out how to meet those workforce needs of employers. In other words, K-12 can't operate in a vacuum. We've got to figure out how to get everybody to the table and become more informed. We can do that through career pathways. We can do it through work-based learning opportunities, and we can do it through focusing on equity, especially in our underserved populations and in some of our more dire needed counties and districts. Danielle, I see your video again.
Yeah, Dr. Pruitt, I was so glad that you really mentioned about, kind of how automation is going to change things. It's not necessarily the fact that a robot is doing someone else's job, but that individuals are going to need different kinds of skill sets because kind of the mundane parts are going to get automated and that higher order thinking is going to be needed and really demanded, which is why we need so many individuals to do something, past high school, whether that's a certificate, whether that is going to a 2-year university or 4-year university. But I was wondering if you could talk about, how, if you've seen that people have, started to understand how automation really is going to impact the workforce in our state as a whole. At the Georgia Chamber, we started to do a little bit of polling around this of just, Georgia voters. And we really see that, I think the average Georgian isn't quite grasping, what this is. I think it's similar to what we've seen before, and other changes in the economy. It's something that people aren't quite prepared for. But, I know we've seen so many good comments about, we need to widely share this, research that y'all are doing because it is so timely and has so many great actionable steps. But how are y'all feeling that this is being received by individuals, understanding, the ability of automation to really transform how people are working and how our economy is going to function?
Danielle, I wish I could say that it's being embraced and moved forward. I would say that it's moving, but it's slow. There is one of the things that we as humans tend to do is we start hearing messages, and if it doesn't happen immediately, we think, oh, well, that was just something somebody made up. And the issue around automation, like I said, we've sort of been joking about robots and what they would do for us since the Jetsons came on back in the 60s. The problem is that we literally are at a juncture right now where we can't, get to the Jetsons while thinking like the Flintstones. And that's sort of where we are. We have folks that, like I said, they still have this vo-tech mentality that the shop class, we just need to get kids to deal with that. But even some of the more traditional industries or workforce needs that may have in the past been somewhat more mundane have changed. In fact, I'll show you this. This is when I was in Henderson County, Kentucky, I had a kid that made this for me. And he walked in and he said, "Hey, Commissioner, push this button." And I said, "Dude, I'm from the South. You know how many jokes start with that?" And we laughed. And he had coded his plasma welder to make that. Okay. Now, here's the thing. We think about welding as connecting two pieces of metal. So I started talking to him and I said, "Hey, tell me how how long does it take to do this?" And he said, "Well, first of all, it took me the longest part is the coding. It takes me over an hour to code that." So immediately I started thinking, "Oh, coding. So we're talking about some computer science here." He said, "But I had to calculate the angles. And I had to calculate the length of each of the sides." And so he starts really explaining trigonometry to me. And then He said, and I wanted this to be something that you could keep. So I had to also evaluate what type of metal I needed to use and what we could use. And so he's talking about everything from science to math to engineering to science, to computer science. It was incredible to think about that, not that long ago, we just thought about a kid picks up a blowtorch, lights it, and connects two pieces. And this kid is talking about this huge thing. And then he was also doing work-based learning in a facility where he had to learn how to code things to weld this piece that was then sent over to the advanced manufacturing plant, who used the robots to pull it off the assembly line and attach it to basically the door of a Toyota. And so if everybody could hear that kind of story, maybe we could start making headway. But unfortunately, and I think this is where you guys play such a critical role, people by nature are going to be content. And we've got to figure out how to make this sense of urgency where people see, oh my gosh, this is really happening. I mean, another example I use a lot is when the pandemic first started, we were ordering face shields, by the tens of thousands. Well, we had a shortage. So then people just started making them themselves on their 3D printers. I mean, there's coming a day where we won't go to Target or Walmart to buy a bicycle. We'll simply order it off the internet and build it with our own 3D printers because the cost is coming down so much. So I say all that, Daniela, to say, I still don't think that we have gotten through to people that automation in and of itself is going to be a huge impact, but it impacts how kids learn to a point that we can't simply put them in a dead-end job, meaning that, yes, they may be employed right now, but we didn't provide them with the skills and ability to problem solve that puts them into a new learning pathway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to your point, if we can develop that sense of urgency, I think it would really propel a lot of this collective collaboration, helping industry meet with education leaders, elected officials, and all coming together. I think getting that, disseminated, this urgency is there and that we really need to propel it forward, I think is really going to help spur a lot of this collective action that I think you shared. And I think that our group is so excited about kind of seeing being implemented in a really actionable way. So I think that's fantastic.
Excellent, excellent. Well, what I'd like to do is I'm going to end my presentation by just showing you a quick example of what can happen when industry, government, and education come together around a specific need. And this is an example from right here in Georgia. So, there's a challenge that we deal with across the South and really across the country of how to provide more young people with an education that connects the classroom and the workplace. And then on top of that, how to help them succeed in post-secondary, but also with a focus on in-demand careers. And the solution is that we have to transform education with these rigorous pathways and help them lead to post-secondary credentials, which could be an associate's degree, it could be a certificate, it could be a baccalaureate degree. But I do know this, what we've got to do is we need to double the percentage of young adults who earn post-secondary credentials by age 25 over the next 10 years. If we do that, then we can see where our economy can flourish and will continue to be the best in the world. So a big need in Georgia right now are nurses. We see a significant amount of deficit. One organization that we talked to just earlier this week, they're spending $20 million a year just on the recruitment and training of nurses. And that's not sustainable. I'm sorry, on the outsourcing of consultant nursing. That's not sustainable. They've got to hire nurses, but there's not enough in the pathway to get them there. We started this project about 3 years ago, and all the logos up here are people that brought to the table to have this conversation. The Georgia Board of Nursing, Cobb County Schools, Marietta City Schools, the state, Chattahoochee Community College, Georgia Highlands, We had a senator. We had the technical college. We had the Georgia Department of Education. And most importantly, we had Wellstar, the biggest employer of nurses, or the biggest healthcare in the state. They never missed a meeting. They appointed somebody to this work, and she was there every single meeting and held people's feet to the fire. This was hard work. It took us a couple of years to finally get this launched, but it helped us because Wellstar, whenever somebody would say, well, I don't know if we can actually have all that transfer credit, they'd say, oh, no. This is what we agreed to. And they guaranteed that each person that graduates or receives a certificate through this program will at least get an interview. Now, obviously, they're not going to guarantee a job because you have to deal with individuals, but they were guaranteed an interview. And every time somebody started to slip, they'd say, hey, if you're not going to do your end, I'm not going to do my end. They were critical to this work. So this is what ended up happening. It created a pathway that started in high school where a student could take 26 hours of dual credit. They would end up with industry valued certification for the certified nursing assistant, and which leads to employment. They can get into employment. Now, the idea here is we want people to proceed because the CNA is not going to necessarily get you to a high wage career. But here's what was cool, and this is why all those people at the table were so important, and why Wellstar was so important, because they drove this change. All those hours automatically transfer to the technical college, which is where they can get an associate's degree. They can get an LPN, which is necessary and needed in our career fields. They needed 68 credit hours. They then now actually have a family sustaining wage, but they also are on a career track that if they choose to, they could go to the bachelor's degree. Again, this is not usual, but all of those credits transfer to the university. They can now go to the BSN, which obviously has an even greater wage benefit. So this became a full pathway that began in high school and meets an industry need, but all of those people at the table with the industry having the central role that helped drive this change. Now, some people say, well, what if a kid got into technical college or university and decided I don't want to be a nurse anymore? Well, here's what's cool. Not only did it transfer toward their pathway, if they decided to do something different, they didn't lose those credits. They just became general education credits. So it still helped them get farther down the road toward a degree. The other part is this. With being able to start employment after their CNA after high school, they are making money. They're not going into more debt. We don't see greater student debt with this. And we see students who are meeting an industry need in Georgia, but also coming out of it with a livable wage and not under the yoke of student loans. So here's the thing, COVID, it's our next exit. And what we've got to do is figure out how we're going to make our system a system of off-ramps as opposed to what could very well be a one-lane dead-end road. And the only way to make sure that that doesn't happen is that there's a greater partnership between our industry, our education system, and our government bodies. So with that, I'm going to end. If any of you ever have any questions or you'd like to talk to me more about it, this is my contact information. Follow me on Twitter if that's your thing. But feel free to reach out. We are here to help and support you, just like we are with our government and education entities. So with that, Danielle and Jenny, that's my presentation. I know we've got some questions that you want to do. And gosh, I'm sorry. I think I went a little bit longer than I was supposed to.
No, Dr. Pruitt, I think this has been fantastic. I know we've got so many questions and comments just in the chat. I think everyone has been really excited kind of about the opportunities you shared about work-based learning, apprenticeships, and all of that collaborative work. I know we've talked about the pandemic. I think we're all maybe a little sick of talking about the pandemic, but it's had, an incredible impact on the economy. We saw so many of those fields that you mentioned that just, lower skill occupations that really don't have as many opportunities for advancement. I think we all are, very cognizant that we're still not done with understanding what long-term impacts that COVID's going to have. We know that we're continuing to change, evolve. Are there any, areas that you really see, healthcare is I think a great one that we've known we've had huge demand prior to COVID, but any areas that we really should be thinking about encouraging people towards, especially think about what's high demand, those fields too that aren't as susceptible to automation, that we can really put people in a great place where they can get a great living wage and then continue to build their career. Are there certain industries that you would like to highlight of things we can think about?
Sure. I mean, advanced manufacturing is one area, and actually, so the project I shared with you that we did with healthcare, we're doing the same thing right now with advanced manufacturing. That's a huge need in Georgia. Actually, a huge need everywhere. We're seeing where more and more of that is necessary for everyday life. As much as what happened yesterday, we had a Mars rover land on Mars yesterday, and that didn't happen because a bunch of people put a Lego set together. I mean, that was advanced manufacturing. And so that is, I think, a great opportunity. I think anything around artificial intelligence is a field rife with fertility. I mean, there's if you read in some circles, there's actually some thought that computer coders may become the new blue collar worker, because the advancements in artificial intelligence are such that we are really going to be dealing with these intelligences, and somebody's got to code those. Somebody's got to understand those. I mean, the Mars rover tweeted from the surface of Mars yesterday. I mean, and so I think anything dealing with artificial intelligence, investments in that, we are actually hopefully going to start some projects on that as well, not in Georgia at this point, but in some of our other states. I also think that there are still things like welding that are a big need, but not welding in the traditional sense. It's similar to what I was mentioning earlier. But besides healthcare, those three immediately come to mind. Obviously, I would just say this too: any kind of focus on computer sciences as a whole, cybersecurity, any of those kinds of things are just going to be great opportunities for adults and kids. Oh, somebody.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd say, yeah, I think that, I think a lot of good, things here. And I know too, what we saw with a lot of our members is when, like our financial institutions were trying to get PPP loans, ended up automating a lot of things to respond to normal requests, as our banks were so worried about getting PPP loans and helping small businesses stay afloat. Of course, increased digitization as more people are using their apps because they can't get to a bank to do a deposit. So I know we've seen it, things that I think people thought were going to happen, I think to your point, 5 or 10 years down the road. It's just increased everything because there's so much demand. We're doing things differently. We're operating. I know we've seen a huge increase in cyber attacks, and we've seen great things with our university systems as well as the technical college system about how to create cyber professionals, because we need a whole lot more of them than we have in the state. Jenny, I wanted to turn it over to
that about the cyber attacks. So when I was commissioner in Kentucky, we had, a huge data system, right? I mean, like I said, it was everybody. It was K-12, post-secondary, and workforce. And we got about 2 million attacks a year that we had to fight off. I mean, and that's an education system where people are trying to just get personal information. Imagine what's going on with our security and our banking and all that.
Yeah, we've been working on a cybersecurity bill with the Georgia Chamber, and what we've seen and heard from a lot of our cyber and privacy experts is that, cyber criminals that are state sponsored or from other countries are literally trying to disrupt vendor transactions. You're trying to pay people that are doing things for your services. They're trying to steal all this money. So I think, we're continuing to see, especially you're doing more of that than mailing a check, you're doing this digitally. So I think more to come, and we're going to continue to see how much of this evolves and accelerates. But Jenny, I wanted to turn it over to you too, if you've seen anything in the chat that I've missed or anything kind of from Goodwill's perspective that you'd like to kind of share.
No, I think that everybody in the chat has sort of been playing the amen role, that you're you're an evangelist, Dr. Pruitt, in your message, and Dr. Thomas added some richness to that conversation, and you've gotten lots of support. You know, I certainly think that where we as Goodwill and where our peers in the community-based organization role play is making sure that there's more on-ramps for people who need a little bit of additional support, or maybe aren't thinking about these in any way, shape, or form, and don't have the guidance and support because they're not attached to K through 12 and they're not attached to our TCSG wonderful system. And so the community-based organizations can play a role to help with the case management and convening and support services to make sure that people understand how to navigate and get onto those career pathways and bridges. So we just very much thank you for that. And just if there are any last questions in the chat, please let us know so that we can use our experts and appreciate what Dr. Pruitt has brought us and what Danielle's richness from the Georgia Chamber of the experience. I don't see any coming up.
I will say, because I saw her in chat box, have to give a shout out to the award-winning, incredible Ann Kramer, you know, who is the only person I know who's able to be in multiple meetings at the same time. Physically, actually.
Cheering one on and adding richness to the other. We all want to be Ann when we grow up.
Yeah, I always wanted to be Ann when I grew up.
Thank you, Steve. I'm writing you a love note. Thank you, thank you, thank you. In fact, I just wrote a note to John Hilton and Paige Pushkin that we need to put it on the agenda.
Excellent.
Well, speaking of the agenda, that's a great segue. Thank you so much. We hope that these kinds of dialogues and opportunities to meet with experts and hear what is not just going on now, but what is coming in the future and how we all need to prepare to work together and have collective impact is what Max is all about. And so we want to make sure that you are reaching out to your peers, helping them to know there's great content for their agendas. There's great speakers that can really help all of us to get this important work done and to make our state and our region more competitive and that we lift all boats as we rise up together. So I want to just thank you both again for your time. Thank all of you who attended as members and as guests. We very much appreciate what you're doing and joining us. We have another event coming up on March 5th. And in the meantime, when if you're able to join that one, but just want to know what's going on, Max Mondays and our other Max communications will be going out, and make sure you sign up through that newsletter on metroatlanticexchange.org and tell your friends. And I just want to check one last time into the chat and make sure that we are not missing any folks that had more than wonderful kudos for our presenters to share with us. And I think we are okay. Just lots of support and praise for you. So again, thank you so much. Any last thoughts from you, Dr. Pruitt or Daniela?
I'll just say thank you for having me, and anything we can do to help, we are always here. And I put in there, if you want to follow Twitter, SREB on Twitter, it's at SREB Education. And to Ann's point from earlier, the partnership has actually been using our materials quite extensively. In fact, this year's top 10 and last year's top 10 actually weighed pretty heavily on our research. So at least that part's covered, but we're happy to help in any way we can. And thank you for having me today.
Thanks, Dr. Pruitt.
And thank you, Daniela, for your very apt moderation and richness to add to the conversation. We appreciate you and your membership on the board. And again, thank you to all of you out there, metroatlanticexchange.org, and come join us for the next Max Minutes on March 5th. Thank you so much, and have a warm, safe, and comfortable day. Take care.